Who are the standout performers in today's Miami Dolphins training camp practice? We got you covered here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thursday, August 1st, 2024, practice is in the books, and we had offensive and special teams coach availability before practice. We heard from Tyreek Hill after practice, bunch of practice observations on my handy-dandy notebook here. Some of which I can't go into full detail on, but we're going to talk about standout performers throughout and give a little bit of love to a couple of different guys up and down the roster here today on Locked On Dolphins. And then I want to touch on something that I asked Butch Barry. That's important perspective for training camp as a whole. And then a little bit of insight on maybe a hidden element of Tua Tagovailoa's evolution this season and how it can help the Dolphins continue to be an even more proficient offense in 2024. So let's start with my practice notes. We had stretch and walkthrough for first period. We had some indie drills and offensive walkthroughs and install on period 2. Another indie period in period 3. Period 4 was kind of when the first bit of action came. There was some wide receiver and DB one-on-ones. And I am really, Tyreek Hill was a part of these today. He got after Jaylen Ramsey a little bit. He had a really nice first win to set the tone for the period. He breaks outside release. Jaylen Ramsey has inside coverage. He's in his hip pocket, and Tyreek just is able to fully accelerate and ends up running a wrap inside of inside leverage for a completed pass that only a few guys with speed are able to do. And Tyreek being among them was a really impressive route. Jaylen Waddle had several incredible routes, including one. It was a little bit later, and it wasn't in this one-on-one period, but Jaylen defended Waddle running. He pressed outside. He broke back across his face, and the change of direction was just unreal. But Jaylen Ramsey, to his credit, illustrated this looseness in his hips, his ability to flip himself 180 degrees. And even though he gave up a little bit of separation, because he is such an elite length player, he reached his hand in there and was able to break up the ball. Tyreek in that same period came back at Jaylen Ramsey and ran a fade. And Ramsey was able to break it up, stay attached, and prevented the vertical stack in the same way that he wasn't necessarily able to prevent that stack of Ramsey on the wrap in. So elite players going at each other in practice. I think Kader Kohou deserves some flowers for the past 2 days of practice that he's put together for the Dolphins as well. He's a part of that dust up with Jaylen Wright or a little earlier in the week, but he's had the dog the past couple of days, and he has been playing really physical. He had great positioning on a fade of his own. He's combative at the catch point. The other day, he had the practice breakup against Devon Achane on a deeper route down the sideline. But I've got Kohou's name written in here 3 times on the one-on-ones. I thought somebody else in the one-on-ones who stood up in a good way was Saran Neal. He broke up a fade of his own. He protected it. He's defending Braxton Berrios on that, prevented vertical separation. But then he also undercut one of the young players. Was it McGowan, 87? Undercut him on an out route and dove across his face and made an interception on a play shortly after another one of the guys who was in my notes for a positive performer today, Marcus May. A lot of DBs that stood out. Marcus May had an interception on the far field in a one-on-one setting as well, showcasing some really nice ball skills. So I knew kind of coming in after doing offensive line heavy notes with the Tuesday practice that I wanted to be really dialed in some of the indie period stuff with the guys on the perimeter, particularly in the secondary. You hear all this buzz for Ethan Bonner. Wanted to see how much hype Ethan Bonner was living up to with his performance. Today's practice, I don't think, was his best. Now, he also caught a lot of slants in one-on-ones. And when you're catching a slant in one-on-one and you're playing maybe 5 yards off, what are you going to do? Like, that's a hard thing to defend in one-on-one when you don't have other people to help you leverage that route. So the movement skills, I think, were the biggest thing for Bonner that really did stand out. And I don't just mean, hey, he moves well in a straight line. He can carry guys vertically down the field. And he can do that. Make no mistake about it. But I think the foot fire and the fluidity for being a taller corner for Bonner is something that stands out. And they'll need to continue to invest in developing him as far as instincts and coverage and leverage and all that stuff. But watching him do the indie periods and doing some of the one-on-one stuff with transitions relative to guys that are other corners in the room, he does move, and not just in a straight line, with a little bit of a different physical ability. They came out with a team period after that, and there was some really nice moments in there, including the Tyreek catch deep ball that you saw on the social media timeline. If you missed it, the Dolphins posted this one. Would have been a sack in real life, but the throw itself, with Tua getting off of his spot and being forced to move, was a perfect throw, which you liked seeing. And at the same time, they didn't wear pads today, right? They were in shells. So if we're going to say when the pads come on, hey, this is a different level of evaluation for the offensive line, I would just like to have the same energy for when they take the pads back off again and they're playing with just shells, to say, I'm going to give them, from a pass protection standpoint, at least a little bit more grace. Because those guys aren't going to stop flowing even if you slip off, if they slip off you and you can't grab a hold of anything. And Kendall Lamb talked about that at the end of last week. So some of the pass rush stuff you kind of take for a grain of salt. Now, if there's a guy who gets a win from a free run perspective, or if there's a guy who gets a win from a first contact, like hand counter perspective, you chalk those up. But if guys are like slipping and sliding off of blocks and then continuing with second effort to the quarterback, at least for me, it carries a little bit less weight, just because it is kind of that ambiguous. And you like the fact that they let those things run and let guys kind of get a grasp on let the full play run out, to not lose a rep for something that may or may not have happened in a real life setting. Now, they did a couple of red zone periods. The first team offense was pretty sharp. There were no snap issues today. Everybody can collectively take a breath. Maybe we could stop blowing this thing out of proportion and asking the team to go sign a bunch of centers or to stop practice and run wind sprints, because the UDFA centers, who are your third and fourth string guys, can't snap the ball. Andrew Meyer and Aaron Brown are not making the team. I'll give you a spoiler alert. So if those guys are the catalyst of 80% of your snap issues, let it go. And guess what? There were no snap issues today. And Liam Eichenberg continued to get his looks at guard as he continues to try to win that starting spot. You know, that's an open competition for the Dolphins, that guard spot. And Eichenberg was the backup center last year. You could very easily get into a situation this year where he's the backup center again this year, and the team knows he can do it in a pinch. But that's also a guy who was your second string center last year, not getting reps as a center. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, there was another team period too. And we mentioned these red zones. Tua hit a backside corner. It was late in the progression. That was a beautiful ball just over the top. Jaylen Waddle toe tapped it, got it both feet in the back end line. They were, I think, at the 10-yard line. So it was a far throw because it was to the field, not the boundary. So there was a little extra on that throw to the back side of the progression, back pylon. Waddle toe taps, gets in, punts the ball out into the parking lot, all fired up. That was probably the hallmark play of that red zone period. But the other hallmark play for any of the team periods was the last period, the final period. The team went out there and they had the first team offense out, or the perceived first team offense out. And Tua had the ball at the 50-yard line with 30 seconds and 1 timeout. Objective, you're down 2 points. Get in position to score. They have a completion for 8. Incomplete. They tested. He tried to throw back shoulder to River Craycraft against Jaylen Ramsey, an incomplete pass on a ball up the sideline. Second down, nice in rhythm kind of pivot route in traffic in the middle of the field. It's marked for 8. 3rd and 2. They were facing a zero pressure look where they're nobody deep, no defenders deep. It looked like a pressure look. Looked like they were going to bring pressure. And Tua throws hot off of it and hits Jaylen Waddle in stride for what was a long, explosive touchdown score in a 2-minute offense situation to win the period effectively. I love seeing that kind of situational type football stuff. The Tuesday practice, it was short yardage in general. It was 3rd and 1. Get him up on the line and run a bunch of plays and looks out of it. This was a little bit more actual situational end of game type situation. And first team offense got the win in that situation. And that's the kind of stuff I think the more continued work that they get and comfort they get in it, the better they will be as a whole. Now, Butch Barry, I asked him something in the build up to practice today in regards to how the offensive line can make the most of what it has to do this time of year. That's coming up next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Going to the game is not supposed to be stressful. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. So get your tickets with wherever you want to go through Gametime, an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. They have last-minute deals where you could save up to 60% on tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. They have flash and zone deals to help you save even more. And they're all in pricing, allows you to see the total before you put the tickets into your cart. No surprise fees when you go to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets to the lowest prices, guaranteed. So I've always wondered this kind of stuff for training camp and how you make the most of kind of individual players. And this question was something that I knew coming into training camp, I was curious about with how the Dolphins had to play with their offensive line last year. As there were a lot of games where the Dolphins had guys that prepped a whole week to play, and soon before long, you're in the actual game setting, and somebody has to change spots because somebody's out of the game. And everybody talks about timing in this offense. They talk about timing for the passing game. They talk about timing for the motion and the snap point. But this wide zone scheme that the Dolphins run is also reliant on timing in the running game, because there's front side combinations, there's backside combinations, there's everybody's explosiveness is different as far as individuals and getting out of the blocks. And you could have Isaiah Wynn or Robert Hunt in that spot, and then it's Lester Cotton or Rob Jones. And the athleticism is different. So the timing with different guys is different for working combinations or stringing out the point of attack and the back getting out, making his read. And when there's all this chaos around it with different guys, I would imagine it's challenging. And this time of year, they're churning guys. Different guys are playing next to different people the whole time. So I've been curious, and I knew coming in, if I had a chance to talk to Butch Barry, I wanted to ask him about the timing of the running game. So I asked him about that, as far as he had just finished talking about guys being on individual developmental curves and how, everybody's a little different. So I piggybacked off of that, and I asked Butch Barry this question that I've had about the timing of the running game. Here's what he has to say.
Which with guys playing in different spots, with guys having different developmental curves, how challenging or how do you go about working on facilitating the timing of everything with the offense, be that the running game or kind of timing up, getting your fits on guys on the first level? How difficult is that when everybody's so different and it's so early in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things that we're able to kind of subjectively put it in. So if we want to block a defender at the second level, based upon number one thing is understand what scheme we're running, right? Number two, understand what type of track of the back has. Number three, obviously you got to understand your defensive personnel, all right? And so with all of that information, we can give a starting point for if I'm on the play side of a play, or if I'm on the back side of a play. So we start with a starting point of a concept, right? Now, being a professional, that's where we can go individually and fine tune, hey, for you, let's move this aiming point a little bit further, a little bit tighter, right? So now when we have that, we can start to really get detailed. But everything starts as a starting point. So everyone starts with the same starting point, and that's what we rep, that's what we rep, that's what we rep, that's what we rep, and that's what we're going through right now. So when things may not look perfect at times in practice because we're going off a starting point. Now, as I know each guy better and better and better, and based upon the personnel that we're going against and having pads on, now I can start to fine tune that. Hey, you got to be a little tighter with your aim point. Hey, you got to be a little wider with your aim point, because who it is, who the defense personnel, who the offensive player is, all those things, that's where now, you know what I mean? And that's probably in the next week, and we start to get Atlanta, that's where we can start to get into those details per our players and then per who we're going against, right? So right now we're just trying to get the process of what is the starting point of every block that we do relative to every scheme in backfield action. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Butch, I wouldn't ask you what specific.
How do you not love Butch Barry, man? And he's talking to Omar and he's talking to Barry, and he's like, you got to move your hand placement here and your landmark's got to go here. Really fun answer from Butch Barry. That's it answered my question in more ways than one. Because the week-to-week preparation, you can extrapolate off that answer from Butch Barry. Everybody in the room kind of understands how there's an automatic adjustment based on who you're going against on any given week when you start playing for keeps. And this process of fundamental, here's the base foundation of every run scheme, that is being repped right now. And then every player, as that process gets honed, will understand, here's automatically my own adjustment that I'm going to have to make. And that process, as Butch Barry said, is going to start for them next week. But it's also a nice reminder for, like, people go to practice and they tweet, Achane at a 4-yard run. Achane at a 2-yard run. So-and-so blew this play up in the backfield. This was a 6-yard run. This play got clogged up. That play was a negative run. Butch Barry just gave you some excellent perspective. They understand what they're repping right now isn't what it's going to look like when they fine-tune it. There's a foundational period that happens right now that you're laying for fundamental understanding of the concepts based on what the landmark is of the running back, based on what the run concept is. Is it a gap scheme? Is it a zone scheme? Is it an outside run? Is it an inside run? Is it counter? Is it power? Is it lead? Is it wide zone? Is it Wanda, which is their weak side outside zone? All of that's different combinations to the play side and the back side based on the front that you have, right? So this time of year for them right now is only if we're running Wanda, weak side, outside zone. The running back's track is the butt cheek, outside butt cheek of the imaginary tight end that does not exist there because we're running to the weak side. What does that mean if you have an even front or a nose tackle or an odd front or an under front or the safety spinning down? This is fundamentally how it's supposed to be blocked. They're not even getting into the fine-tuning of the individual players yet. And nobody has any reason to doubt it, because this offense ran the ball with great success last year. They had a ton of explosive plays, outside runs all over the place. Do you want to see a little bit more variety with it this year? Yeah, I think you'll see a little bit more inside zone.
But the body of work is here, and everybody last year was singing the praises of Butch Barry. And rightfully so. It was well-deserved for all of the interruptions. This team had 9 guys who played at least 300 snaps on the offensive line last year. The primary backup played more spots at every spot except for right tackle on the offensive line. So I guess for me, that perspective from Butch Barry is enlightening for the in-season stuff on how you handle that when it happens in season. But it's also perspective of right now, like, I don't care if the run goes for 4 yards right now or if it goes for 2 yards. You say, oh, they can't run the ball. Who's the center? Who's the guard? Who's the tackle? Is their strengths as a player tailored to what the base foundation install of the play is? Everybody wants every time of year to be results-oriented. This is not the time to be results-oriented. That's why you hear players talk all the time, quarterbacks all across the league. My coach wants me to be aggressive right now. My coach wants me to push the limits on the throws that I'm able to make. And if I throw interceptions, now's the time to throw them because they don't count. The same thing goes for the run scheme and the install of it. And it was cool to hear Butch Barry go through what their process is and the fact that they haven't even started tailoring to the players yet. They're just drilling the fundamentals and the core principle of the plays right now. Speaking of the running game, I talked to Daryl about Bevel as well. And asked him 2 questions pertaining to Tua Tagovailoa and his contributions to the Dolphins' run schemes. And what do I mean by that? Because we know they're not going to call a bunch of runs for Tua. I will expand on, and we will hear from Daryl Bevel on the other side of the break. Stick with us. We all love sports. Makes this time of year a little bit more difficult because the sports have stopped sporting the way that we want them to. The NHL, the NBA are gone. We're waiting for the NFL to come back in full force. We do have the Hall of Fame game tonight. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So before I get to the Bevel clip, which I thought was very interesting, it's worth acknowledging how this scheme is supposed to work. Wide zone offense. And wide zone rushing offense, at its core, they are looking to win to the front side of the play and get optimal numbers to the front side of the play, the point of attack. And there's always going to be a numbers disadvantage because of there's a ball carrier versus 11 defenders. All right. And then there's also a quarterback. So a lot of times when you hear about math changers and quarterbacks, you can change the game and be having an extra ball carrier, an extra blocker because the quarterback is a running threat. Nobody's going to mistake Tua for being that caliber of a threat. And the way that the wide zone rushing offense tries in one of its ways to counter that, as you see it with a lot of the play action passing for these schemes, there's rollouts and boots and the quarterback getting out on the edge. And they'll hand the ball off and they'll boot. Even if they've given the ball to the running back, they will boot. And that is by design. Oftentimes the unblocked defender in a lot of the wide zone runs will be the backside away from the play and man on the line of scrimmage. And for Tua last year, there were times where he would boot out of that on his actual play action passes and have the ball. And he would be faced with a defender who had kind of surfed back out and was in a position to challenge him. And he had to try to make a throw with a defender in his vicinity. And he had to either beat that player outside, and he did it against the Giants and threw a touchdown pass in the low red zone off of it. Or he would have to try to throw without his momentum to the line of scrimmage, kind of like he did against the Raiders on a one-hopper to Alec Ingold over the middle of the field. So I asked Daryl Bevel about how Tua's added mobility can help this offense with its run schemes and influencing that backside defender. I had a chance to hear Coach Chandler Henley speak a couple years ago, and he spoke about
The influence is in the wide zone of the backside defender. And if you are successful as the quarterback in holding that player and creating that extra gap by booting off of your run action, even if you are not running the ball with the quarterback, if that defender has to honor you and freeze, that pause creates a lane where if the back presses the hole and then has to get back up the field and bend it back if he goes gap by gap, and if he gets all the way to the back door and you've held the backside end man on the line of scrimmage, that gap will be there and he can hit that gap even if you didn't block that player. So I asked Darrell Bevell about that and how Tua, with his mobility, everybody's all obsessed about outside of structure. How can Tua and a little bit of added mobility help this run scheme for the Dolphins and their running game, even if you're not calling run plays for Tua? Here's Darrell Bevell.
The emphasis with Tua's added mobility this offseason's felt like it's been some of the outside of structure stuff. But how do you anticipate this potential change for him helping execute from like the wide zone run scheme perspective, influencing backside defenders and helping to hold that guy and help your running game, even though you're not calling plays for him to carry the football?
Yeah, we're always trying to see if we can pull one guy out of the defense on really all of our run game. That's our job. It's not a playoff. One, we have to be able to get it to the running backs on the wide course that we have, but also is continuing to carry out our fakes to be able to affect. If we can affect one guy out of the defense, then we've done our job. So we try to do that each and every play.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Coach Henley on a coaching clinic 1 or 2 years ago referred to those as RBIs for your quarterback room. What's the anatomy of that? How much of that is ball handling versus intent coming out of the mesh point versus the actual running ability of the quarterback to hold those?
I feel like it's most of that. I feel like number one, it's we coach a lot on how we want them to hand it off, what we want them to do with their hands, and then also like the tempo with which, as you're referring to, the tempo with which they come off the fake. I think that intent that they have, the backside defenders can recognize that or see that. So yeah, we're trying to do that every play we can.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So I think this is perhaps the way that Tua's mobility can most directly and from a volume of plays perspective pay off for the Dolphins. If you have a little bit more juice where you force that backside defender to honor you a little bit more, because there were times where he was unblocked and he kind of surfed down and then he processed. Tua still had the ball and he got back out there and he got in a position to challenge him before he threw the ball. If Tua has a little bit more juice out of there to be able to get outside the pocket and either beat that guy where he's not in a position to threaten him, and Tua can throw on the move or potentially set his feet to throw something a little bit further down the field, that in turn is going to help the efficiency of the play action pass boot game and also help the efficiency of the Dolphins running game on those instances where that back has to come all the way back through all the gaps and come out the back door, and know that that end man defender is not going to be crashing down hard every single play. Because if they do that, Miami's going to call the boot off of it, and that crash down hard is going to give up the edge, and Tua is going to be out on the perimeter with the football. So that's for me where I think Tua's added mobility, more so than outside of structure, creating with screen, like at its core, how much are we really going to get that versus playing smart and protecting yourself with the ball? So for me, understanding that element of this offense and understanding that this is a potential payoff for Tua, and hearing Darrell Bevell talk about this is something that we try to do as much as possible, and it is a part of the equation for how effective it is. I think is maybe an under-talked about storyline about how Tua can help further improve the offense, even if you're not calling plays for him to run the ball. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Appreciate you guys for checking it out. Go Dolphins. I will be back to talk to you all again tomorrow with another practice recap coming your way. Hope to see you then.